She sat in the parking lot of her doctor's office for 20 minutes before she could drive home. Not because of the diagnosis. There was no diagnosis. That was the problem. Everything came back normal. Her blood work, her thyroid panel, her cardiac screening, all normal. And yet she knew, with every fiber of her exhausted, trembling, insomniac body, that something was profoundly, undeniably not normal. She was 41 years old, and she felt like she was unraveling from the inside out. No one could tell her why. No one had ever warned her this was coming. I have sat across from hundreds of women who tell me some version of that same story. Hundreds. Women who are intelligent, self-aware, medically literate, women who track their cycles, who attend annual checkups, who read health articles, and listen to wellness podcasts. And still, when perimenopause arrived at their door, they had absolutely no idea what was happening to them. They thought they were dying. They thought they were developing early-onset dementia. They thought their marriages were falling apart because something was psychologically broken inside them. And the most devastating part, the part that still makes my chest tighten after all these years of clinical practice, is that every single one of them says the same thing. Nobody told me. Not my mother. Not my doctor. Not a single class I ever took in school. Nobody prepared me for this. And they are right. Nobody did. There is a silence surrounding perimenopause that is so vast, so deeply woven into the fabric of how we raise and educate women, that it functions almost like a conspiracy of ignorance. Not a malicious one, not deliberate, not calculated, but devastating all the same. Mothers don't tell their daughters because their own mothers never told them. Doctors don't explain it because medical schools spend, on average, fewer than 5 hours on menopause education across 4 entire years of training. And perimenopause, the transition phase that can begin a full decade before menopause itself, often receives no dedicated instruction at all. Schools teach girls about the beginning of their reproductive lives, the onset of menstruation, the biology of pregnancy, but never about the equally dramatic, equally life-altering transition that marks the other side of that arc. We prepare women for the opening chapter of their hormonal story and then abandon them completely before the final act. Think about what that means. Think about the millions of women, right now, tonight, lying awake at 3 a.m. with their hearts racing, their sheets soaked in sweat, their minds churning with an anxiety that appeared out of nowhere. Women who have no framework, no context, no language for what their bodies are doing. They don't know that this is a recognized physiological transition. They don't know that it has a name. They don't know that there are 34 documented symptoms associated with this phase. They just know that the person they used to be seems to be disappearing, and no one around them can see it happening. Let me tell you about one of my patients. I'll call her Rebecca. She came to see me after 18 months of what she described as a slow-motion breakdown. It started with insomnia, not the occasional restless night, but a deep, structural inability to sleep that persisted for weeks and then months. Then came the anxiety. Rebecca had never been an anxious person. She had built a career in crisis management, for heaven's sake. She thrived under pressure. And suddenly she was having panic attacks in the grocery store. Her heart would hammer. Her vision would narrow. She would grip the handle of the shopping cart and breathe through her teeth and pray that no one she knew would walk down the aisle and see her like that. She went to her primary care physician, who prescribed an antidepressant. She went to a cardiologist, who ran a stress test and found nothing. She went to a neurologist because she was forgetting words, common words, words she had used her entire life, and she was terrified it was the early stages of Alzheimer's. The neurologist told her she was fine. Stressed, probably. Perhaps she should consider therapy. Nobody, not a single one of those physicians, asked her about her menstrual cycle. Nobody inquired whether her periods had changed in any way. Nobody mentioned the word perimenopause. Rebecca was 43 years old, sitting in the demographic sweet spot for this transition, presenting a textbook constellation of perimenopausal symptoms, and the possibility was never raised, not once. Not when I finally explained to her what was happening, when I drew the connection between her fluctuating estrogen levels and her insomnia, her plummeting progesterone, and her anxiety, the neurological impact of hormonal instability on memory and cognition. She cried. But she didn't cry from relief, not at first. She cried from anger. 18 months of suffering. 18 months of feeling like she was losing her mind. 18 months of shame, because she had started to believe that she was simply weak, that she couldn't handle the normal pressures of life anymore, that the problem was her. And the whole time, it was biology. It was always biology. Rebecca's story is not unusual. It is heartbreakingly common, and it speaks to something much larger than individual medical oversight. It speaks to a systemic, generational, institutional failure to educate women about one of the most significant physiological events they will ever experience. Here is what I need you to understand about perimenopause, because there is a very good chance that no one has ever explained this to you clearly. Menopause is a single point in time. It is the moment when you have gone 12 consecutive months without a menstrual period. That's it. One moment. But perimenopause is the long, turbulent, wildly unpredictable transition that leads up to that moment, and it can last anywhere from 4 to 12 years. Some women enter perimenopause in their mid-30s. The average onset is around 40, but I have seen it begin earlier. And during this phase, your hormones are not simply declining in a smooth, gentle curve. They are surging and crashing and fluctuating with a volatility that can make puberty look stable by comparison. Estrogen, in particular, becomes extraordinarily erratic during perimenopause. There are months when estrogen levels spike dramatically, sometimes higher than they've ever been in a woman's life, and then plummet just as dramatically. These wild fluctuations are what drive the hot flashes, the night sweats, the mood instability, the migraines. Meanwhile, progesterone, the calming, stabilizing hormone that counterbalances estrogen, begins a steady, irreversible decline. This loss of progesterone is often the first hormonal shift of perimenopause, and it is directly connected to the insomnia, the anxiety, the irritability, and the sense of inner restlessness that so many women describe. But it goes deeper than that. Estrogen is not merely a reproductive hormone. It is a neurological hormone. It is a cardiovascular hormone. It is a metabolic hormone. Estrogen plays a critical role in serotonin production, which regulates mood. It influences dopamine pathways, which govern motivation and pleasure. It modulates GABA receptors, which control the body's ability to calm itself. When estrogen becomes unstable, these neurotransmitter systems become unstable. This is why women in perimenopause don't just experience physical symptoms. They experience cognitive symptoms, the brain fog, the word-finding difficulties, the terrifying moments when you walk into a room and cannot remember why. They experience emotional symptoms, the sudden rage that erupts over something trivial, the weeping that comes without warning, the flatness, the apathy, the feeling of being disconnected from your own life. And here is the part that makes me angriest as a clinician. These symptoms are frequently misdiagnosed. Women in perimenopause are prescribed antidepressants when what they need is hormonal evaluation. They are told they have generalized anxiety disorder when their anxiety is being driven by progesterone deficiency. They are referred to memory clinics when their cognitive changes are a well-documented effect of estrogen instability on the prefrontal cortex. I am not saying that antidepressants are never appropriate, or that anxiety disorders don't coexist with perimenopause. They absolutely can. But when the root cause is hormonal, and the hormonal component is never assessed, we are treating the branches while ignoring the roots, and women suffer for it. They suffer enormously, and they suffer in silence, because the silence is the only thing they've ever been given. I want to pause here and say something directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are watching this. If what I am describing sounds familiar, if you are sitting there right now with tears forming because you have lived this, because you are living this, I want you to know that you are not broken, you are not weak, you are not imagining it, and you are not alone. What you are experiencing is real. It is physiological. It has an explanation, and more importantly, it has a path forward. I've seen so many women find genuine support once they finally understood what was happening inside their bodies. There's something I've been sharing with my patients that has been making a real difference for many of them. You'll find it in the first link in the description below this video. I mention it because I believe in being practical, not just informative. Knowledge matters, but so does having something tangible to work with. Now let me address the generational dimension of this silence, because it matters deeply. Many women tell me that when they tried to talk to their mothers about what they were experiencing, the conversation went nowhere. Their mothers either dismissed the symptoms, "Oh, that's just aging," or changed the subject entirely. And this is not because those mothers didn't care. It is because those mothers went through the same thing, unrecognized and unsupported. And they survived it the only way they knew how, by enduring it silently and refusing to look back. There is an entire generation of women, our mothers, our grandmothers, who white-knuckled their way through perimenopause and menopause with no hormonal support, no medical acknowledgement, and no cultural permission to struggle. They were told it was normal. They were told it was natural. They were told to push through. And they did. But pushing through is not the same as being okay, and silence is not the same as wellness. Many of those women developed anxiety disorders, depression, insomnia, and cardiovascular issues during those years, and those conditions were attributed to aging, or stress, or personal weakness, never to the seismic hormonal shift that was actually driving them. And because they never received recognition for what they endured, they had nothing to pass on. They couldn't warn their daughters, because no one had ever validated their own experience. The silence perpetuated itself, generation after generation after generation. This is also an educational failure. In most school systems around the world, reproductive health education focuses almost exclusively on the beginning of the reproductive story: puberty, menstruation, fertility, pregnancy prevention. These are important topics, absolutely, but they represent only one half of a much larger biological narrative. The other half, the transition out of reproductive years, the hormonal shifts that begin in a woman's 30s and 40s, the physical and psychological impact of those shifts, is almost entirely absent from curricula. Girls learn that their bodies will change when they become women. They are never taught that their bodies will change again, just as dramatically, when they enter the next phase of womanhood. And so they grow up unprepared. They grow up believing, unconsciously, that once puberty is over, their hormones will remain stable until some vague, distant point called menopause, which they imagine as a brief, manageable event that happens to older women. The reality is so different from that expectation that when it arrives, it feels like a betrayal. And it is a betrayal, in a sense. Not a personal betrayal, but a systemic one. Society has failed these women. Medicine has failed these women. Education has failed these women. And the women themselves have been left to pick up the pieces alone, often in the dark, often in shame, often convinced that the problem is something uniquely wrong with them, rather than something universally experienced by half the population. I want to tell you about another patient. I'll call her Maria. Maria was a teacher, a brilliant, passionate, devoted teacher who had spent 22 years in the classroom. In her early 40s, she started noticing that she couldn't concentrate the way she used to. Lesson plans that once took her 30 minutes to write were taking 2 hours. She would lose her train of thought in the middle of a sentence while standing in front of her students. She started feeling overwhelmed by noise, the cafeteria, the hallway between classes, the sound of children's voices that had once been the soundtrack of her life's purpose. She became irritable, snappish. She yelled at a student for the first time in her career and then locked herself in the faculty bathroom and sobbed. Maria went to her doctor and was told she was burned out. She was given pamphlets about work-life balance and mindfulness meditation. She reduced her hours. She tried yoga. She drank chamomile tea. And nothing changed, because the problem was never burnout. The problem was that her progesterone had fallen to nearly undetectable levels, and her estrogen was swinging wildly between extremes, disrupting her neurotransmitter balance and inflaming her nervous system in ways that no amount of deep breathing could address. When Maria finally received proper hormonal evaluation, when someone finally looked at her symptoms through the lens of perimenopause rather than through the lens of lifestyle, she wept the same tears Rebecca wept, tears of fury, tears of grief for the months she had spent doubting herself, and then, slowly, tears of relief, because once you know what is happening, you can respond to it. Once you have a name for it, it stops being a terrifying mystery and starts being a manageable reality. This is the power of knowledge, and this is why I do what I do. Because every woman who understands perimenopause before it arrives, or even while it is arriving, gains an extraordinary advantage. She stops searching for what is wrong with her and starts understanding what is happening to her. Those are two very different orientations, and the space between them is the space between suffering and empowerment. I also want to address something that I hear constantly, and it breaks my heart every time. Women tell me that they feel like they have lost themselves. They look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back. Not physically, although the physical changes are real and disorienting, but emotionally, cognitively, spiritually. The woman who was patient is now explosive. The woman who was confident is now riddled with doubt. The woman who loved social gatherings now cancels plans because the thought of being around people feels exhausting, and she doesn't understand where she went. She mourns her former self as though that person has died. But here is what I tell every one of those women, and I tell you now, you have not lost yourself. Your hormones have shifted the ground beneath your identity, and you are recalibrating. That is not loss. That is transformation. It is difficult, and it is disorienting, and it is valid in every single emotion it generates. But you are still here. You are still you. And on the other side of this transition, many women discover a version of themselves that is more honest, more boundaried, more clear-eyed, and more fiercely authentic than anything they have ever known. Perimenopause strips away the tolerance for things that don't serve you. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also, in its own brutal way, clarifying. The path forward begins with information. It begins with understanding what your body is doing and why. It begins with finding clinicians who take these symptoms seriously and who are trained to evaluate hormonal health comprehensively. It begins with community, with finding other women who are navigating this same terrain, because the isolation is one of the most damaging aspects of this experience, and it is entirely unnecessary. You are not the only one. You have never been the only one. There are millions of women walking this path right alongside you, and many of them have found strategies, support systems, and approaches that have genuinely transformed how they experience this transition. I've seen women completely reclaim their energy, their clarity, their sense of self, not by fighting their biology, but by finally understanding it and working with it. If you're looking for a place to start, there's something I've been recommending that many women have found genuinely helpful. It's in the first link in the description or the pinned comment below. Take a look when you're ready, no pressure. Just an option that might meet you exactly where you are. I want to close with something that I carry with me from every patient encounter, from every tearful conversation in my office, from every email I receive from a woman who tells me she finally understands what is happening to her body. This is not just a medical issue. This is a human rights issue. Every woman deserves to know what her body will do. Every woman deserves to be prepared for the transitions she will face. Every woman deserves a medical system that recognizes her symptoms, an educational system that teaches her about her own biology, and a cultural conversation that does not consign one of the most significant experiences of her life to silence and shame. We can break this cycle. We are breaking this cycle. Every time a woman learns about perimenopause and shares that knowledge with her daughter, her sister, her friend, her colleague, the silence cracks a little more. Every time a clinician takes these symptoms seriously and offers proper evaluation, the failure shrinks. Every time a conversation like this one reaches a woman who needed it, the isolation recedes. If this reached you at the right time, if something in these words resonated with something you have been carrying alone, then I am glad you are here, and I hope you will stay. Subscribe, because this conversation is far from over. There is so much more to understand about your body, your hormones, your health, and you deserve all of it. Every answer, every explanation, every tool. You were never given the preparation you deserved. But it is not too late. It is never too late to understand yourself. And the next time someone tells you it's just stress, or it's just aging, or it's all in your head, remember this: it is in your body. It has always been in your body, and your body has been trying to tell you the truth all along. The only failure was that no one taught you how to listen, until now.